Okay, so I'm going to do a lesson on adding and subtracting integers. It's something we work on a lot, and we're getting it. We're slowly getting it, but there's still some confusion out there, so I want to present this lesson, and hopefully this will clear some things up and give you a way to work these problems a little bit faster and even get started where you can sort of work them in your head without using the number line. And I'll go over kind of both ways. So adding and subtracting integers. So I don't think I need to explain, if you see minus 1, you know what that means. It means subtract 1. If you see plus 1, you know what that means. It means add 1. Okay? So I don't really think we need to go over that. And if you see any whole number or any number, period, just by itself, you know that that's a positive number. So just for instance, if we had 2 plus 4, this first 2, even though there's nothing telling you what to do, like there's no sign out here or anything, positive or negative, it's a positive. I think we all are to that point where we know a number with no sign.
Instructors, at this time, all middle school basketball boys report to the big gym. All middle school basketball boys report to the big gym.
Okay, so all middle school basketball boys report to the big gym. There you go. So I think we know that much. So if there's no sign, if it's just a number, we know that that's a positive number. And if you see it at the beginning of, say, an equation or an expression, then that means you add that number, but you start at 0. And I'll get to starting at 0 in just a second. So, but what really causes the confusion is when we have situations like, we'll just say 1, plus negative 2, okay? Now it can be written like this. Most of the time we see it like this in parentheses, but these are the same things. It doesn't matter. The parentheses are just there to keep it clean and to keep our signs separated. It looks nice, but we don't actually have to have them, okay? So that's the first thing we need to make note of, is the parentheses don't really matter. What we have here in both cases are 2 symbols in a row, okay? So we've got to figure out how to interpret 2 symbols in a row more quickly and easily than we are now, okay? So when there's 2 symbols in a row, there are 4 scenarios, okay? So the first scenario, you can have 2 positive signs in a row. So you can have, it can be 1 plus positive 2, okay? You can have that. Second scenario, now, well, before we go on to that, you need to know 1 plus 2, a number without a symbol is a positive. So that's really a positive 1 plus a positive 2. Okay? So anyway, yeah. So the second scenario would be maybe 2 negatives side by side. Okay? So that would mean subtract a negative, and that would just be 1 minus negative 2. Okay, equals 3. Because we actually add, and we're just about to go over that. So the third scenario, plus a negative, in the fourth scenario, minus a positive. Okay, now what I want to show you is these 2 and these 2 are grouped together because they actually mean essentially the same thing. So number 1 and number 2 mean the same thing. Number 3 and number 4, they mean the same thing as well. Okay, and the way I want you to think about it, and I borrowed this from one of the high school teachers. You can thank Ms. Rice Johnson for this example. It's one of the best, or illustration anyway, or way. It's a way to think about adding a positive, subtracting a negative, adding a negative, subtracting a positive. It's a way to think about what that really means in the end, okay? Because all we're trying to do is figure out what are we doing to the numbers, okay? When we have to solve equations like this and this, okay? We just want to know, what do I do with this number, okay? I've got 2, subtract a -1 right here. Well, I just want to know, what do I do with this 1? Okay? What do I do with this 6? What do I do with this 1? Like, what do I need to do? That's what we really need to know. So, this is one way to think about it. Okay? So you're going along and you're living your life. How good is your life? What is your quality of life? And you could assign that a number if you wanted to, okay? So you could assign it, say, yeah, my life's pretty good. I'm rolling around about a 7. Could be better, but could be a lot worse, okay? Now think about if you were to add something positive to your life, okay? And that could be anything. Maybe you get a new cell phone or something, anything, a new video game, whatever. Something you like, something you desire, you get it, and it's a positive thing. Well, you have added a positive thing to your life, okay? Now, if we assign a value to that thing, say a new cell phone is worth 1 life point, we'll call it, okay? So you've added a positive 1. Now your life is about an 8. You love your new cell phone. You have increased the quality of your life, okay? Now, which really just means you've increased the quality of your life by 1, okay? So 2 symbols, they really just mean one thing. They mean add 1 to the current quality of your life. Okay, so what about, now you're at a 7. There's another way that your life can get better. You can get something good or something unpleasant, something you don't like about your life, can go away. Your life can get better that way. So let's say again, you're living in about a 7. Pretty good life. Could be better, but it could definitely be worse. So let's subtract something. Okay, what's bugging you? Something that's bugging you. Something that's bringing your quality of life down. It could be anything. Let's just say, I don't think too many people are big fans of riding the bus to school. Okay, most people don't like that. So let's say that instead of riding the bus, you don't have to ride the bus anymore. You're just going to get a ride every day. Your good friend just turned 16 and got a car, and they're going to give you a ride every day. So, okay. So instead of adding something to your life, we can take away something that's negative. So we can take away that bus ride every morning. Okay? Well, doesn't that also make your life better? Wouldn't that also increase your life? If you take away, let's say, not having to ride the bus is worth a 1. It's a -1. Having to ride the bus is a -1. So if you didn't have to ride the bus, your life would be 1 point better. Well, if we take that away, we subtract it, as in here, have we not increased your life, your quality of life by 1 point, just the same? So essentially, subtracting a negative is the same thing as adding. Okay? So in both cases, you can see we're turning 2 symbols into 1 symbol, because we just want to know what to do with these numbers, what to do with them. Okay? That's all we really want to know. So the 2 symbols, you can only do one thing in this case. You can either add or subtract. You can't do both. Okay? So we've got to figure out what these 2 symbols mean. Okay? So in this case, subtracting a negative is just like adding, and adding a positive is adding, okay? So there are two ways. That's why these two, oh, excuse me. They both mean addition, okay? So, let's think about this another way. Let's say, let's see. You may pause and write that down if you need to, but I'm going to go ahead and okay, well, what about these? What about these two guys right here? What about adding a negative or subtracting a positive? Okay, so again, we're cruising along in our life. We're living at about a 7. Could be better, could certainly be worse. Not doing too bad. So what if we add something negative to our life? Let's say our friend loses their license and we have to ride the bus again, okay? So we've added that -1 back to our life. Well, that took us down to a 6. So it's the same thing as just subtracting 1. Okay? Now, what about subtracting a positive? Okay? Well, we can use the exact same example. The positive was being able to ride with your friend and not ride the bus. So when we subtract that positive thing, we'll call it a 1. We'll say riding with your friend made your life 1 point better, but we're going to take away riding with your friend. Now you've got to ride the bus again. Okay? So you're back down to a 6. So essentially, subtracting a positive is just subtracting. You're back down to a 6. So those are your two scenarios with the two signs. Okay? Now, one thing that I see a lot of confusion about, these two signs right here, these two signs, they always affect the number to the right. They have nothing to do with this over here, okay? They just tell you what to do with this number, okay? So I have seen some students become confused. They'll see -1 minus 2, and they know that minus a negative equals a positive, so they'll come up with some crazy thing where they think they're adding them together. So they'll think, well, that's 3. We're just adding them because 2 negatives make a positive. No, that is not what we're talking about. 2 negatives make a positive when they're together, when they're side by side, and that's what we're talking about with all of these. The signs have to be side by side with nothing in between them, okay? So that's one way to think about subtracting negatives, adding positives, subtracting positives, or adding negatives. They're the same thing, and one way to think about it is just, think about the quality of your life. How good is your life? If you add something negative to it, you're actually decreasing the quality of your life. If you subtract something negative from your life, you're increasing the quality of your life. So you're adding. Okay? So that's just a way to think about it. And you can thank Miss Rice Johnson for that. That's one of the most intuitive ways I can think of to think about it. Okay? Now, I want to say another thing that I've seen some confusion on. Okay, let's say we have 2 plus -2 plus 1. Okay, there's some confusion about this first number and kind of what to do to it, and sometimes people think, well, this sign here has something to do with this number, has something to do with this first number. It does not. It has nothing to do with it. Numbers without signs are always positive. And it simply means the first number is what you do from 0. When we're doing these integer addition and subtraction problems, we start at 0. We start at 0. That's what we always start at. So if the first number is a 2, first number is just a 2, well, that's where we begin our thought process. Okay? That's where we begin our thought process. And then we move on to the next 2. So we start at 2. Now we need to know what to do with this next 2. We are at 2. This is where we live. We live right here. But this next number, this next 2, the one right here, is going to tell us where to go from where we live right now. We live right here at this 2 because that's where we started, right? This 2. So, if we're subtracting a negative, remember, just like your life, if you take away something negative, you're adding. So we're really adding 2 here. Okay? So we start at 0, and then whatever our first number is, that's where we start. And then we continue on from there. If we had to add 2, then we would move 2 more in the positive direction. Oops, excuse me. And we would wind up at 4. Okay? So what if the equation started off with -2 and plus 1 minus 2, something of that nature? Well, same thing. We always begin our thinking at 0. So 0 minus 2, we just wind up at -2. If you'll notice, basically, that's just the first number is where you start. If it's a -2, you start at -2. If it's a +2, you start at +2, and so forth. If it's any negative number, you're going to start on this negative side. If it's any positive number, you're going to start on this positive side. And then, that's where you are. That's where you live. -2. When we add 1 here, that means we're just going to go 1 in the positive direction from -2, which is going to put us at -1. Okay, so we start at 0 and we go from there. Okay, so you can either think of it as starting from 0 and adding 2, which is going to put us at +2, or you can just think of it as starting at the first number, whatever it is, positive or negative. It just tells you where to start. Okay? So let's work some problems. So 4 plus 2, and I'm going to draw the number line just for us to get started, but I'm also going to talk about how to work it in your head and what you need to be thinking. Okay, so on the number line, we start at 4. If we're thinking 0, and we know that if a number does not have a sign, it's actually positive, we know that we go from 0 to +4, so we're adding 4 to 0. But we're basically just starting at 4, okay? Well, if we add 2, we all know what this is. We're just going 2 in the positive direction. This is the positive, this is the negative. We're going to wind up at 6. Okay, nothing too hard about that, but just to start our thinking, if we were to not draw the number line, we just hold 4 in our head for a second, because that's our starting point. So we start thinking 4, and then we think, well, what happens if I add 2 to the 4? Well, 6. And you know this, and this is somewhat repetitive, but we want to start our thinking somewhere that we know what we're doing. So, okay, so again, almost the same thing, except what do we have? We have a -4, so that means we start at -4, and you could think of that as we actually started at 0 and we subtracted 4, or you can just think I start at the first number, -4, and continue on with the next numbers telling me where to go. So right now we live here at -4. Well, we have +2, which just means add 2, so we go 2 in the positive direction. And we wind up at -2. Now, one note. These parentheses, they don't mean anything in this context. We could just as easily write this, and it means the same thing, okay? It's just a way to keep things clean. If we wanted to add an exponent, it would make a difference, but we're not working with exponents right now. So you don't have to have the parentheses. So when I say two signs in a row, if it's minus, that is still two signs in a row. Okay, if it's minus -2, that's two signs in a row. But we know we can only do one thing to a number. We can't do both. We have to only do one. So we have to figure out a way to interpret these things. And what I'm going to do is show you a way to rewrite more complicated ones. Okay? So we're here. We start at 6. Now remember, we're subtracting a negative. So subtracting a negative, if you take something negative out of your life gets better, right? So it's really just adding. So we rewrite the problem, 6 plus 1 is 7. Okay, and there are some tricks. You can just do that, mix plus sign, or every time you see two negatives, you can just draw two positives. So it means 6 plus positive 1, which is just, it's all 6 plus 1. It's all the same thing. Okay? So we can just rewrite it to something that we know what to do with. And in our mind, we're thinking we're at 6. Maybe we can hold the number line in our mind and think about that and think, well, we're at 6. Say 6 is there. All we have to do is go 1 in the positive direction, and we're going to wind up at 7. Okay, or we can just hold 6 in our mind and think, what happens when we add 1 to it? Well, we end up with 7. Okay, so this one, number 4, the number line. So we have -6 out here. So you can think of it as we started at 0 and we subtracted 6 and wound up at -6, or you can just think, well, I'm just going to start where this first number tells me to start. -1 just means we are continuing in the negative direction 1. So this one actually doesn't need to be rewritten, okay? It will work out just like that. This is all in the negative direction, so we wind up at -7. Now, some bigger ones, and here's where we get into some ones with the double sign. So, again, parentheses do not matter in this case. We could just as easily write this whole thing like this, and it means the same thing. But let's think about it. We're adding a negative.
Instructors at this time, escort all students to the cafeteria so that we can prepare for a second hour. Escort all students to the cafeteria to prepare for a second hour.
Okay, sorry about that. So what, we've got two signs here, okay? We know this means plus, because we start at 3, but we've got two signs here. We're adding a negative. Think about your life. If you add something negative to your life, you've just subtracted from it. The quality of your life has gone down, just like we were talking about before. So we can just rewrite that. 3 minus 7. We can just rewrite -2. There's only one way to interpret that, -2. What about adding a -1? Again, we've added something negative to our life, so that is just like subtracting, okay? If you're living a certain life and you add something negative to it, your quality of life will go down. You will subtract. So we get rid of all these funky double symbols here, and we just know what we're doing now, okay? So we start at 0. We can think, well, we add this first number here to 0, or we can just think we start at 3. If you add 3 to 0, you wind up at +3. Now, 7 in the negative direction. That's all. We're just subtracting 7 from 3. 7 happens to be larger than 3, so we know that if we go 7 in this direction, it's going to take us past 0 into negative territory. So it's actually going to take us to -4. We go 7 in this direction. Now this is where we did live at 3. We moved to -4. This is where we are now. If you're doing this in your head, you hold the number, you hold your spot in your head.
attention students would all
Oh my goodness.
cheerleaders go to room A-138. All cheerleaders go to room 138. Thank you.
Okay, a lot of announcements here, but anyway. So the number you hold, the first number you hold in your head is 3. Okay, so you just hold 3 in your head, and when you subtract 7 from it, so 3 minus 7, you've got to know since 7 is larger and you're subtracting it, you're going to wind up in the negative territory. Okay? So maybe you can work that out in your head. Maybe you need to keep on practicing with the number line, but at the end of the day, once you process, so to speak, this negative 7 right here, okay? You started at 3, you process this negative 7, now I'm thinking negative 4. Negative 4 is my placeholder. This is currently where I live at negative 4. Now I'm going to subtract negative 2, which just means I travel 2 more in the negative direction. Now we're at negative 6. One more number to process, and that's negative 1. This means I travel 1 more place in the negative direction. So in your head, if you're not using, if you're trying to get away from the number line, which is nothing wrong with the number line at all, continue to use it as long as you need to. But in your head, you should start off thinking 3. I have 3. I start at positive 3, however you want to think about it. I subtract 7. Okay, and if you get good enough and familiar enough with the number line, maybe you can visualize that. Visualize subtracting 7 from 3 and taking you back across the 0 into negative land and winding up at negative 4. But now we're holding negative 4 in our mind. So we've processed this and we've processed all this. So now we're at negative 4. That's the number we have. We have to process this. So we're at negative 4 minus 2 brings us to negative 6. So negative 6 is what we're holding in our head. Okay, we traveled 2 more in the negative direction. Now we're holding negative 6 in our head, and we're going to process this last one. We've already processed this one. So negative 6 and 1 more in the negative direction takes us to negative 7. I may have wrote that wrong. But anyway, it takes us to negative 7. Okay? So essentially 3 minus 7 minus 2 minus 1 negative 7. Okay, last example. Again, we're just going to rewrite these things. We know what they mean. We know this means negative 7. That's our starting point. 0 minus 7, or just start at negative 7. Well, what about subtracting a negative? If something negative is removed from your life, you don't have to ride the bus anymore, that's a win. That's a positive thing. So we're going to add 2 negatives. Subtracting a negative is adding. What about adding a negative 2? Okay, well, if you add something negative to your life, say we added 2 bus trips. Maybe, somehow in some alternate universe you can be beamed back home and you've got to take now not only 1 bus trip, but 2 bus trips to school every morning. So that is a negative thing, okay? You're adding a negative to your life. You've added 2 bus trips, but that's horrible for you. So you're subtracting. Your quality of life will go down. Well, okay, but we're going to take away negative 4. So if there was something horrible, I can't even think of anything, but something bad in your life, but it gets taken away, then that is going to increase. It's going to add to the quality of your life. So now we've converted all these double symbols into single symbols, and we know what to do. So if we want to think about it on the number line, here's 0. If we start it at negative 7, we're going to travel 3 in the positive direction, which is going to put us at negative 4. Now, so we've processed this one. We process this one. We process the sign and the number. Okay, so, and we live at negative 4 for now. Now, we have to process this one. How do we do that? We just travel 2 in the negative direction, which puts us at negative 6 for now. Now we live at negative 6. That's the number we're thinking. We process that. Now, if we're at -6, we have one more sign and number to process, which means that from -6, we travel 4 in the positive direction. That's going to take us to -2, and that is where we end up. So if you're doing it in your head, you can just think, I start at -7, I add 3. So if you can visualize your number line, and you know you're down here in negative land, and you know if you have to go this direction, then your numbers or your negative numbers are getting smaller. Okay, 3 is not enough to get us from -7 back to 0, but it will get us to -4. So now we hold -4 in our mind, and we subtract 2 from it. That's just 2 more in the negative direction, so now we hold -6 in our mind. So we've got -6 and we're holding that in our mind. Well, if we add 4 in the positive direction, if we can visualize this number line, and these being negative and doing anything positive, making you travel this way. So if we're at -6, and we have to travel in the positive direction, that is going to take us to -2. If we're at -6 and we have to travel in the positive direction, 4, it's not enough to get us back to 0, certainly not enough to get us into positive territory. It's just enough to get us back to -2. And that is the answer again, -2. So start with the number line. After you work with them long enough, hopefully you'll be able to do these in your head. But the main thing is we've got to realize these 2 signs, you can only do one thing. You can either add or subtract. You can't do both. Okay, so whenever you have 2 signs, they're telling you to do one thing with the number, and it's up to you to figure out what that thing is. And the trick is, if the signs are the same, as in 2 negatives or 2 positives, we often don't write the positive sign, but if it's just plus, that's 2 positives. But 2 of the same sign means you add. Okay, so if there's 2 of anything that are side by side, they both pertain to this number, that means you will add this number to whatever number you're holding in your head, or whatever number you're at on the number line. Okay? Now, if the signs are different, say you've got a positive and a negative side by side, they have to be side by side. There can't be anything in between them except the parenthesis. It can be there, but like we said, it doesn't have to be there. So if you have signs and no number between them, we'll say that's going to be negative. It's going to tell you to subtract that next number. So anytime the signs are the same, you add the next number. Anytime they're different, you subtract the next number. And you just proceed like that, starting at 0. And then, or starting at your first number, however you want to look at it. Start at your first number, or subtract your first number from 0 in this case, or add if it's positive from 0. So anyway, I hope that helps. Probably a little long, but again, this is something we have to continue to work on. It's something that will just click into place sooner or later. You'll be doing it, like I've said many times. Sometimes math is something you get used to long before you understand it. So sometimes you just have to get used to things, and then you'll just be thinking about it one day, and then you'll actually achieve some sort of intuitive understanding. So hope this helps. We'll see you in class or next time.